It is not showing up yet live. Oh, there's so much stuff that has changed.
It's just setting up the meeting for YouTube Live now.
Okay. It is not showing. Yeah, it's given the countdown.
Perfect. That's good enough.
No, I mean the countdown to like the time, not the countdown screen that it'll send. Okay, now it says live.
Okay, perfect.
Here we go.
All right, we are live. Okay, so Tomi, can you please share the presentation? Hi, everyone, wherever you are in whatever time zone you are joining us from. Welcome to the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read. And we are here to discuss Octavia E. Butler's book, Fledgling. This is the last of her standalone novels that we will be reading, and it's also the second last book in the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read. So this is a very exciting time. My name is Injeri, and I am the founder and one of the co-hosts of the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read, and also I am of Onyx Pages, a YouTube channel that focuses on Black speculative fiction. And I'm joined today by Tati, a musical Tati, and also Kiki, Akilah Wright, and who is our special guest, and we will be doing some introductions of Kiki, because for those of you who have been with us for a while, Kiki will be a new face for today. So if we can go to the next slide.
And as with every live, we will start with our dedication to Octavia Estelle Butler. You wrote for freedom, yours and ours. We honor this when we read slowly, luxuriously, and collectively, exactly as you had imagined. We are your legacy. Okay, you want me to do this one? Okay, so we'll start. We've already had our welcome and our dedication. We're going to move after this slide into our group agreement. And then from there, we will go into our book chat. We'll have our host reflections as well as the breakout room discussion, where you will have an opportunity. And depending on how many persons we have with us today, we may not split the breakout rooms. We may just stay all together, which is a fun experience that we have had before. So we shall see, but we'll have that discussion to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts in open discussion with the group about the book. And then we will also have our sound circle after that and our selfie. So if you have your book, however you took in Fledgling, if it's physical book, ebook, audiobook, Kindle, that's ebook. Okay, then have your book ready and we will take a selfie after we do the sound circle, and then we'll have our announcements at the very end before we go. And we would like to say, and Jerry, I'm jumping because you do this all the time because she's yours and that's great. But I would also like to say a wonderful thank you to Tomi, who has stepped in as our wonderful techie person to help us in the background. So Tomi, thank you. We love you. Thank you. She always gets to do that. Now your turn.
I would like to introduce you to Akilah Wright, aka Kiki. Kiki is a Jamaican freelance book reviewer, editor, living in the Shark's Mouth. Her present preoccupations are literary fiction, poetry, science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction with a focus on anything queer Caribbean. Her writing has appeared in The Book Slut, Rebel Women's Lit Magazine, Intersect Caribbean, Queer Feminist Stories, Volume 1, amongst other venues. After her first panel appearances at the Fantastic 2021 FIACon, she most recently joined the Bocas Lit Fest family as a guest interviewer for its Bios and Booksmark series. And when she's not doom scrolling on Twitter, you can find her in her online yard at at If This Is Paradise on Instagram. So very happy to have you with us, Kiki. And Kiki is also one of the co-hosts of solar-powered Afrofuturism Slow Reading Group, and happy to have your thoughts about Fledgling today. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
We are creating space together, and in so doing, we want to make sure that we are all sort of on the same page. And you'll see on the slide the very famous quote, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you," as spoken by Lauren Oya Olamina in Parable of the Sower. In this particular space, we are very focused on ensuring that we are centering the voices of people who are Black, Indigenous, or who identify as people of color. And so we will make decisions around how we manage time and airtime in order for that to happen. Please speak mindfully. So when you are sharing your views, whether you're doing it on camera or you're doing it in the chat, please be mindful of the purpose of this space. Hatred will not be tolerated, so propagators of racism, transphobia, and other forms of hatred will be removed from the space and will not be welcome back. And please share responsibly. So we definitely encourage you to share your experiences participating in the slow read, but if you feel that you want to take a screenshot or share a comment or any other form of information like a quote that somebody may have shared, please make sure that you have their permission before you do so.
And as I stated earlier, please get your book ready. We'll be taking a group selfie after we have our discussion, and make sure that you have flagged a short excerpt for the sound circle, and it doesn't just have to be one, it can be multiples. There will be spoilers. This is a book discussion. We're talking about details of the book. So if you have not finished the book, you're welcome to stay, but please know that we will be discussing the content of the story in detail. And then, as always, if you notice something, say something. If someone has said something either verbally or in chat that has made you feel uncomfortable, or if you see someone doing something or saying something in the chat that is offensive, please let us know. We will handle it accordingly.
So we are currently reading Fledgling. Fledgling by Octavia Butler. This is a story of an apparently young amnesiac girl whose alarmingly unhuman needs and abilities lead her to a startling conclusion. She is, in fact, a genetically modified 53-year-old vampire. Forced to discover what she can about her stolen former life, she must at the same time learn who wanted and still wants to destroy her and those she cares for, and how she can save herself. There are trigger warnings up, down, left, and right for this book. We made sure to mention that to you last time we were together. So obviously, if you have read the book, you're aware of what those trigger warnings are, and we encourage you to take the space that you need to as we get into some of the difficult topics of this particular book. And also, please be mindful and sensitive in the ways in which you talk about these topics, recognizing that we all have different histories, and that the things that you talk about and the tone in which you talk about them might land differently as you had intended. So we want to be extremely sensitive when we're talking about the topics set out in Fledgling. All right, so it is at this point that Tati and I will begin by sharing our thoughts of the book, followed by Kiki. So Tomi, if you can please stop sharing the screen, and Tati, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, y'all. New laptop, I clicked wrong. All right, so where to begin with this story? I will say that this is the story where I adamantly and profusely suggest that people who are learning or stepping into the world of Octavia E. Butler, this is not where you start. This book was the last new book that I, no, it's nope. It's not. I saved this book because this was the last book that I had purchased before her passing. I actually purchased this book with the anticipation of seeing her 2 months after purchasing it here in my hometown, and she passed a month before that was able to happen. And so I put off reading it because I knew it was the last thing that I was going to get from this woman that I loved so much. And when I decided to read it, I was like, oh, what have you done to me? Why did you do this to me? Of all of the difficult themes that could be tackled, this was a difficult one to digest. It was difficult dealing with, and we'll call a thing, dealing with Wright and the wrongness that was felt in the relationship between he and Renee at that point. And even in reading it a second time, and I read it the second time as an audiobook, and where I paused and had to sit the book down and stop and think. Of course, an audiobook does not do that. So you're plowing through this scene that's very problematic. And in reading it the second time, I was able to look at it from a different perspective, still feel like it's hella wrong, but look at it from a different perspective and see more of Shori as she is learning who she is from becoming Renee to Shori. So once I put in a little box that I needed to deal with this part of it, I could look at the story at large. And the thing again, why, Miss Butler, have you done this? Where you have this group of the species of people. I don't even know as a vampire lover, I don't even know what to call vampires once you put them in like regular society. They're not a race because anyway, and having this species of people who are centuries old and obviously have the scientific know-how to do things that had never been done before, and to have all of these opportunities for progress, and you still have a significant amount or a good faction that is stuck in racism. And of all of the things that would be an issue, not when I kind of likened it to cloning. When cloning first became a thing that was talked about in the early 90s, and they cloned a sheep, and how so many people spoke out about how it's wrong to do such a thing. And like, I was expecting more of that. I was not expecting that the major issue around this vampire who has been genetically modified, like she's straight up GMO, genetically modified to be able to be as strong as a vampire is expected to be, and be able to also withstand the most dangerous times that a vampire has to deal with, to be able to stay awake at night and offer more protection. I could understand how different that would be from the culture that they have, because we all go to bed at night. But to have what's supposed to be this smarter society, because you would think if you live a couple of centuries, not decades, centuries, that you would be smarter than ignorance, and to have mongrel bitch coming out of the mouth of someone who's supposed to be smarter than that, and to be willing to not just kill one person, but kill multiple families, to wipe out generations because of the creation of this one Black vampire. So between those, and I am steering very clear of the full-on pedo vibes that I have felt from a lot of the characters that are in this story, because I don't speak nicely when it comes to that. And I want to be sensitive to that. So I'm going to say that out front and be real honest about that and respect you all in that way, because I have enjoyed conversing with you all, and I want you all to stay in converse. So, but that was a huge problem for me as well, because even in other paranormal fantasy books that I have read, when you have a group of people who are long living, the developmental growth is not stymied. Whereas if they're 18, they look like a regular 18-year-old person. Now, they may look like that 18-year-old person for 50 to 60 to 100 years, but they look like an 18-year-old person. And here you have a 53-year-old vampire who looks 8. And there are relationships and things that Shori is learning that she knows how to do, but she's learning that through complicit adults who are looking at a girl who looks like she's 8. So big issue for me, but also grateful for the challenge of that, because were this not an Octavia Butler book, I would not have finished it on first read. So taking this is the book that I was like, I am terrified of what this discussion is going to be like, but also excited because I want to hear what other people have to say. Like that's the beauty of this entire journey that we've been on, is the sharing of ideas and thoughts and how we feel, whether we agree or disagree with what what we have encountered as we're reading. So I'm going to stop talking because I said I wasn't going to take 10 minutes and I think I did. So Injeri, your turn.
Thank you. Fledgling is probably one of my favorite Octavia E. Butler books. And I think part of that is because of the complexity of the story. This is, I think, the 4th time I've read the book, and like all of her books, right? Each time I read it, I see something else, or I take it from a different perspective. So, I guess there are 2 things at least that I want to say about it at this point. The first touches on where you sort of left off, Tati, and that we have options. Octavia E. Butler gives us options on how we want to experience Shori. We can either see her as, I think she's 8, 11, whatever, but a child, right? We can see her as a Black child who is discovering herself and basically going through this recovery of her story and of her history, and learning through the eyes of a child, right, or the body of a child. We can look at it that way, or we can look at this as the story of a 52-year-old woman who is physically, right, has the body of a child, but in terms of everything else is it has the identity, the knowledge, the skills, the desires of a 52-year-old woman who's also considered a child in vampire sense of things, right? And I guess that there are a lot of other ways that we can look at her, but I think that hybrid experience of managing who you are versus how you're viewed, and versus what your body, your shape and your size tell people you are, and how they respond to you despite that. I think that's an interesting conversation that she forces us to have because of how she's created this Shori character. And I think that for me, the thing that was probably most difficult to manage during every read was, and I think you mentioned this too, Tati, was the character of Wright, and how quickly Wright was able to, like in a matter of minutes, right, maybe less than an hour, to make some decisions about how he was going to interact with Shori before actually knowing what or who she was, which says a lot about Wright and about his character, that than it does, I think, about Shori. So that was something that that I wanted to talk about. But the thing that really got me this time, that really got me with this story, was the fact that this is in effect one of her best mystery novels, because it is effectively a whodunit. We spend 3/4, if not of the book, it's a murder mystery. It's a mass murder mystery, and it has all of the narrative beats of a mystery story. And I've never, ever considered Octavia E. Butler to be a writer of mysteries. And I thought about that today, and I was like, wow, because I don't really read mysteries. I don't particularly care for them. But here, even though I knew how it would end, I was just like, wait a minute, this is a whodunit, right? It's a whodunit. It's a why they did it. And unlike other whodunits, I think, because I don't read them, we get the delicious satisfaction of seeing the consequences, that face those who did it. And I found the last quarter of the story the most interesting this time, probably because of what I do in non-literature life, but the trial of the Silks, who weren't as smooth as they thought, and the trial of Catherine, and the coming together of this community of Ina to sort of figure out what they're going to, like, what path they're willing to take in the face of the violence and the harm and the genocide that the Silk family was responsible for. So the other thing that I find really interesting about this story is that Octavia E. Butler captured the anger that white supremacy has around Black excellence and Black superiority, like genetic superiority here. And, we literally have this Black character, as you mentioned, Tati, who is arguably stronger because she's actually able to best in a fight a very old female vampire who are supposed to be stronger than the males. We have her being able to best her. She's like intellectually gifted, and she's a day walker. Like, she can do so many things. She is superior to all of the others, and she's a child, right? And so the rage, like the various responses to her, as this like the epitome of like all that they want to be, the hope of the Ina or whatever it is, I just found that very, very, very interesting. Some people were fascinated by her. Some people were disgusted by her. Some people were curious. Many people had a very proprietary relationship with her. Like, you can come and join our families and you can be our guard during the day. So there's still this view that she still has to work for them, right? Like, she still has to be part of the community that they've set up, and they're trying to find the best way for her to fit where she should fit. I just found that really, really interesting. So I'm really curious to hear what you all have to say about this. And I think, like, I'm really curious about people's thoughts when it comes to the systemic oppression that she had to deal with. And what Wright said when he was asked, like when they first show up at not Preston, I don't remember their names, but when they first show up at the last compound that they stay at, and they say, Wright, what do you think is going on? He's like, well, either this is just a group of humans who hate vampires, or this is a group of vampires who don't want her and her family to exist because she's Black, or and I forget the third option, but the way that he sort of parsed out the different dimensions of hate that could have been the reason for the attempted genocide of her and her line, I found that really interesting, that would come out of the mouth of Wright, given what Wright represents in all of this. So yes, one of my favorite Octavia E. Butler novels. really excited to get into the material. Not too excited to get into the Wright and Shori stuff right at the beginning, because it's gross and I don't think I have the capacity to facilitate a conversation that could be that triggering. But I think there's a lot politically and legally and morally and ethically and genetically and racially, gender-wise, sexuality. There's so much that we could talk about. So I'm happy to pass it over to you with your thoughts, Kiki, before we open it up to the large group.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Akilah, or you can call me Kiki. I almost felt at a bit of a disadvantage when Injeri asked me to speak on Fledgling, because this is only my third Octavia Butler novel. I've read the Earthseed duology a few years ago. And before that, it was many, many moons ago in undergrad when I found out for the first time that Black folks wrote science fiction and fantasy like I didn't know. In fact, I think it was when I knew that I started to even see the genre as race as like racialized, that there are different categories in that way, because prior to it was just fantasy, and this was what fantasy was, and the default of the whiteness was sort of invisible to me. And of course, when you hear about Butler for the first time, you hear about Kindred. And so I tried to read Kindred and could not move past the moment when she actually time traveled back to the plantation. I just couldn't do it. Like, it was just too, I couldn't read any further to see what that was like. Like, the prospect of a Black woman now in this present taken back to that time, and I put it down. But my friend gave me her graphic novel adaptation, so I'm gonna try it again. I don't know if the pictorial element will help or not, but we'll see. But this was quite an interesting read for me. When I heard Tatiana say this is not where I would take you as a new Butler reader, I thought, why? I am so there with you. It was a very frustrating reading experience for me, actually. And I had all these kind of plans to do this very sort of like, ooh, organized presentation and PowerPoint and blah, blah. And didn't, because I found myself really frustrated having to even think about the book. I did jump on the opportunity to read it with a group, because I had heard that despite us knowing that Octavia Butler's work in general, as a friend told me, is a content warning, that's just Octavia Butler's writing. I had enough clues to be like, I think Fledgling is probably touching something a little sensitive for me. Let me do this in a group so that I have other person's responses and reactions to think through and think alongside, rather than being isolated in my own head with my own thoughts. And yet, even so, for those followers from me on Instagram, when I hit page 17 and saw what was going on with Wright, I did a panic series of stories on Instagram. I said, look, if you've read this book, spoil me right now about what's going on. Like, tell me everything. I need to know ahead of time. I don't want surprises. I don't want, and folks helped me out. Folks, I have another friend, Fledgling is her favorite Butler. So she sent me material, and I read the material, and I was like, maybe I need to read the book to get what these folks are saying, because as it stands now, this is not persuasive. But I got over it. I read it, and it was really interesting to me seeing in one of your earlier slides, where you have this kind of like dedication to Butler, and you talk about the freedom that her books offer and her writing offers, because lately in the literary space, in various publications like Vulture, New York Times, etc., there have been conversations about how persons approach Butler and how they read Butler, and this idea of her work being about Black freedom. Recently, I think it was by Andrea Chu, I believe that's her name. Oh, I didn't write it down. Very sorry about that. But the article is in the Vulture, and it's called Misreading Octavia Butler, the Slavery Interpretation the Author Couldn't Escape. And so basically what she does is she quotes from a 1996 interview with Butler, where she said, the only time I'm writing about slavery is when I write about slavery, and nowhere else. But then she described a reader who heard that response and said, well, maybe the author doesn't always know what she's written. And she said, well, you know, the two responses are the same. However, apparently, reader interpretations of Butler, and she cited the Octavia's Brood anthology with this lineage where her work is marked, you know, from slavery and the ancestors who were enslaved to now is limiting. There is an article in the New Yorker as well, and I've been seeing these ideas circulating, and I put them alongside writers like Brandon Taylor, who say everyone always reads Black writers' works with race, and there's nothing else that we write about. And even critics and even our own readers don't know how to read us outside of this paradigm. And I found that really interesting. I'm putting the question out to you, really, because I don't necessarily have an answer to that. I think I both understand it and then also question why it feels to me as if their conception of Blackness is limiting in a way that confuses me. But to get back to Butler, as I was reading, I almost found myself coming to the same conclusion. Because so many of the readings of Shori, because I'm someone as a reader, when I'm having problems with a book, I go and read what other people are reading. And when I looked for articles trying to approach the issue of Shori's hybridity, 52 years old, but she only looks 10. And to me, it seemed as if everyone had easily accepted that, like, oh yeah, that's a premise, where I was struggling. I was struggling with that premise very hard, especially when we moved to the Vampire Society, and there her immaturity is also emphasized. So it wasn't even as if, okay, well, it just looks that way in the human world, but then in the Vampire Society, she's a mature adult. That wasn't the case. And in fact, her whole existence, like Injeri pointed to, seemed very much created for this kind of reproductive future. Like, how do we get her to breed us in a way that's better? And when you chart how old she was then, and you look when they must have sort of used reproductive technology to create her, it was around the time of World War II and the Nazis, and those ideas of eugenics. So it seemed, and all of the other vampires are white. So this is happening in this sort of very like whiter than white, typical depiction of vampires, but them being in family with this Black woman and her willingly going, okay, exacting agency in that way to basically ensure the longevity of these white folk. And it was both, like, first I was like, I don't know, but then I thought this is actually kind of interesting to be presented as a positive when usually we're presented as a negative. Like, usually it's about Blackness being a negation. And instead it's the actual opposite. And it's whiteness that's a negating thing, and it's Blackness that's a key to them living. And it was like, that's interesting, and yet also, which tends to happen with my readings of Butler, which is why you can never dismiss Butler's novels, because she's always like really building in a lot of complicated elements. And yet, I think, because I'm going to end here because I could keep going and going and going. But the last thought I wanted to leave, because there's the whole biology of vampirism here, that it's a lot less sort of fantastical. There's this element of how persons read Shori like as this Black character. And I actually thought Blackness as we typically understand it, and also as African US American as that's typically understood. But I thought, but that's not how she became Black. Like, she was genetically engineered. And when we see her, she doesn't remember a thing. folks, like I read Alexis Lothian, which is this great book called Old Futures, Speculative Fiction and Queer Possibility. And the way she analyzed Shori was like this African-American woman who like could read the room and the whole racial dynamics of what was going on with the Ina. And I thought, nah, man, that was Wright. That was like, Wright was the one who could give that analysis, because this is not how Shori is engaging with the world. Like she's not that typically Black character, which is kind of what I could kind of see where critics were coming from, I think, in terms of the way some readings, but I wonder whose readings, and I wish that had been specified, of Butler are limiting. Because I thought actually this book gave us an opportunity to consider her as something completely other, not completely other. You could give her readings in the Black experience, but would have to keep in mind that that is simply not her. That is not how she understands herself. That's how others understand her. So it's going to just leave with this point, this idea around discomfort. So with a different book, in a different book club, I mentioned how I found something disturbing, not in the novel itself, but what I thought it revealed about the author that she hadn't realized. And it was a Black author in a very sort of white racist publishing world. And I thought if she had a Black woman editor and like just more persons of color around her, there would have been better editorial guidance with the book. But I think because I mentioned the word discomfort, the immediate response was, well, is discomfort a bad thing? Isn't that something that this kind of leading question where it kind of automatically by default assumes that when a work of art is disturbing, this is like a good thing. This means it's challenging, it's complex, it's of a higher value, and it's sort of automatically approached from that kind of positive angle. And I can understand why I think, especially for Black readers and just the Black audience, knowing how our very existence is often termed as disturbing and uncomfortable, and anything in relation to us is seen that way. Queer persons, others can relate to this. I could understand why there was this kind of automatic, but isn't that a good thing? Like, shouldn't we be disturbed? Shouldn't you be uncomfortable? In fact, with Nisi Shaw, and I wish I had access to that essay, she wrote the introduction to the first Library of America volume for Octavia Butler, in which Fledgling is included. And she had this phrase that I only saw quoted in another article about the canonization of discomfort. But I wanted to trouble that concept, or not so much Nisi Shaw, because I don't know what she wrote. So I'll leave that alone. But this automatic accordance of goodness, or it's a good thing, to discomfort, because I think sometimes, for me, it's a neutral. Something makes me uncomfortable, I find something disturbing, I step back and assess it. What is the purpose of this? Like, where does it lead me? Does it take me? Is it productive? Is it generative? Is it pushing me in something that can later become useful? But that's not always the case. Sometimes something is disturbing and uncomfortable because, at least according to my values or to someone else's, you have perhaps crossed a boundary in a way that doesn't really take you anywhere worth the disturbance. And I really had to ask that question, because I thought, if this is about power, if this is about hybridity, did she have to look 10? Because why, because I kept on looking for, like, could somebody answer this for me? I kept on looking, like, did it have to be that extreme? Even if it didn't have to be, what am I learning from this plot element of both being looking human and also in the vampire society of being basically being pre-pubescent. Like it's a very like reproductive biological cishet kind of thing going on in this book. Anyway, so I think I'll just leave with that question. I don't have the answer, but it was interesting that I read this book after the other one because it kind of made me think about this idea of disturbance and discomfort, and is that always leading me somewhere worth going? I'm done.
Thank you. And I like the question that you've left us with, which is, is that discomfort worth it? Was that discomfort worth it? And where does it lead us to? So given the amount of people that we have here, I think it makes sense to have the conversation all together. And you have all heard from Tati, Kiki, and myself. So we're going to open the floor to all of you to let us know, your first thoughts. So before we get into any guided questions that Tati, Kiki, and I might have already raised in our discussion, what are you here that you need to get off your chest? Like, what do you just need to say about Fledgling before we get into more guided conversation? Does anybody want to start?
I still haven't decided. I give the book a 3.5 out of 5 stars because I still haven't decided like necessarily how I feel about it. Just I'm a survivor, so it did trigger me, and it took me like from the beginning of October until yesterday night to finish the book because of being triggered. But Octavia Butler is my favorite author, so I was just like, I'm gonna get through this. So I got through it, and I really don't like Wright as a character. And and the other guy that she meets later on, I cannot remember his name, but his father's like speaking on his behalf, and he's like, "Oh, my son really wants you." And then when she finally talks to him, he's like, "Oh, I wanted you since I saw you." And I was like, since you saw her looking 10? What do you mean you wanted her since you saw her? She looks 10. And so those things were just like, but I really liked how she discussed, like how she tackled racism. There's ageism, there's disability advocacy in there, right? Because those people at that trial, the Silks at the trial, they're trying to infantize her and say like, well, she's a child. Oh, she had head injury. She can't talk for herself. She doesn't know what she's saying. And so, I really like that discussion on that. What's his name, Daniel?
No, that Daniel was the Ina who liked him. I think you were talking about the symbiont. Symbiont?
Yeah,
Humans,
the
the
symbiote.
human,
Yep.
the human, the black human.
Yes, and he said
Me.
he said he wanted to be with Shori. I thought to myself, like, would the story have been different if she had looked of age, like an adult, like 25? And I think it would have been because there's a lot of emphasis on ageism against Shori, because, you're not a full-grown vampire, or people preying on her, like, right, taking advantage of her, even though she's like, okay, I'm a 53-year-old vampire. Even in vampire years, she's still considered like a child vampire, like a young vampire. So I liked the commentary. I liked what she was doing. I didn't like the bits that made me uncomfortable. It was just very hard as a survivor to get through those. Like, and reading comments on Goodread, people on Goodreads were saying like they're not survivors, but it was hard for them to get through. So I'm like, okay, it makes me feel better that it was hard for me to get through because other people had a hard time too. it's not, as of now, it's not one of my favorites. But having this discussion is making me see it from different points of view and different angles, right? Because I just had the point of view of like, well, this is triggering me and uncomfortable. So, But looking at other aspects of the book, there's so much there to cover and to talk about. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to share that. It was difficult to get through, but I really wanted to be here. Um, so we could discuss Miss Butler and her works, and I'd love to hear what other people think.
Thank you. Nikita.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I have to preface this and say that I read Fledgling about a year or so ago. And so my memory of it is a little bit fuzzy. Kind of like Tatiana, I listened to it rather than actually reading a physical book. But like in that time period, I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of this idea of Black girlhood fastness, and also like Black female adulthood infantilization. So in the beginning, you see it's almost like a very uncomfortable and weird subversion of this idea that Black girls are older than they present themselves. And in that, it opens so much opportunities for abuse. But in this case, we see Octavia Butler take that and turn it on its head and show us a young presenting Black girl who is able to, like, she's better able to control herself and the path that she wants to take and make certain decisions that many other Black girls can't make because they don't have the knowledge and the maturity and expertise, which I found interesting. But it also made me uncomfortable because of the way it was presented initially. Like I'm still creeped out by that scene when they were in the car. But it was also like, but that's how people view Black girls. It was accurate in how people, like, from my personal experience as a 10-year-old that looks older than she really is. Yeah, that made me uncomfortable because I knew the exact sentiment that would make Wright do that, if I remember his name right. But there's also this idea on the flip side that even though she's 50 something years old, in reality, the people around her, especially her white colleagues, are still looking down at her as somebody who, despite her wealth of experience, despite showing, as Injeri had said, that she is able to like think things and act in ways that supersede her years because she's naturally talented, they still think that she is somebody that is open to their disrespect because she's just a girl and because she's younger and because ultimately they believe that the color of her skin is going to, I don't know, corrupt their bloodlines and make them less superior than they were. So yeah, it basically erase them. But it it was also fascinating that the jobs that she was offered were mostly like servantile roles, never leadership, even though she was showing very good leadership skills, and even with her memories gone, was able to make critical decisions for her community, not just for herself. And that's another thing that I found interesting about Butler's work, is that she has a stress on building community through biological methods that is both intriguing and sometimes a little bit creepy, but it's all about it's like if you take her work, you can make a tapestry with it, with all the connections that she tries to make. And seeing how Cherie fits into this tapestry with her attempt to bring her family together and her like dogmatic dedication to getting justice for the people that she doesn't even remember. It's kind of like searching for reparations in a way, but it's a very like personal kind of reparation that she's going towards, that even though she doesn't remember, in the same way we don't remember our ancestors' names, but we still try to move towards them and honor them and ensure that their stories are told. That's what we see her doing throughout this novel. So while it was extremely uncomfortable to see those things, it was kind of like watching youth struggle against the odds, struggle against this stereotype that they're not enough or they're too much, and still do the thing that they think is right, amid all of the problematic things in the book. And that's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you. Others, any,
sharing that.
yeah, burning thoughts, things that you came in here wanting to express about Fledgling?
If I may.
Yes.
The whole bit during the trial where I think it was Catherine who was saying Theodora was not her symbiont because she is not Ina. That one really hit me in a way that I don't really know how to express because I have not, like, you can see how I look. I haven't had to face discrimination based on the color of my skin, but I guess it brought about this memory of me reading this passage from a book which, of all things, is about Native Americans and stand-up comedy, which sounds like a very bizarre niche thing, but stick with me. Within that book, in order to understand the context of that history of stand-up within the Native American community, you also learn about American history, Native American history, the politics around how Native Americans have been disenfranchised and represented or misrepresented in media. And there was a section of the book where it focused on the Standing Rock protests and how those Indigenous people were treated, and how essentially it was like, oh, well, the white neighbors said, well, we don't want this pipeline through our neighborhood. And so then they rerouted it, but through a different neighborhood. And there was something that the author brought up where in the Canadian Constitution, it was explicitly said, anybody who is not an Indian is a person. If that doesn't scream, we don't give a crap about this specific group of people, I don't know what does. And it's very tangential, but that's what came to mind for me during the whole denying of Cherie's personhood, essentially, at the trial.
Thank you.
Thank you. What
Thank
came
you
up for
sharing that.
others?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I found really fascinating about the Ina, and I love that part of the movie where all the people from like all the different places come together. Like I always cry at that part of the movie, right? When like the magical people from this continent and that continent, and they come and they all have their own skills, and they haven't all been in the same place for centuries, and they're here because there's a common thing that they need to do, right? No, I just mean generally, right? Like that point in any, frankly, any movie, whether it's Wakanda, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's whatever it is, right? The Care Bear Countdown movie, whatever it is, there's always a point in the movie where people come together from different places and they come together for something, right? And so when I really enjoyed the chapters where it was, again, in the last quarter, where we get the backstory of the Ina, so she's given a history book, right? Because it's understood that in order for her to recover herself, in part to defend herself, she needs to have a really good understanding of who she is and where she comes from, arguably where she comes from. So she's offered these creation myths. She's offered the very tools that are often denied people when they are facing genocide, right? Like the project includes separating people from their history, separating people from their spiritual practices and religion, separating people from their ability to self-identify and to have autonomy, right? So, you see her in this act of getting an advocate and choosing who her advocate is going to be and testing things out. You see her being equipped with stuff, history, stories, lineage, all of that. And so it's amazing and ironic that after she is able to demonstrate that she is Ina, right? Because she's doing that from the very beginning. Like her first impulse.
Yep.
All of her impulses are Ina. They're not human impulses. No one can deny that. And at the end, we have somebody, saying, you're not of us, in the face of that actually being denied throughout the entire story by her actual actions. I thought that was really powerful. And I loved how desperate Octavia E. Butler allowed us to see Catherine as, right? And it was really interesting that we get Milo and we get Catherine. So Milo, old, centuries old, white, European vampire. And also how Octavia E. Butler backgrounds the history. So she just sprinkles things like, oh, this family came to the US in the 1800s. This family came to the US in the 1400s. And I'm like, okay, I'm putting these dates together, right? And I was like, oh, the proprietary relationship between the Prestons and Shuri is actually making sense in a way that she's not making explicit. So I think it's interesting when you say, Kiki, that, this question about it was only about race or only about slavery when she said it was. And here she doesn't say that it is, right? She doesn't. But then we get through Walter, this whole, when she's like, hey, what do you think about the Ina, right? This tall Black man, he's like, well, when I heard what a human symbiont was, it sounded like slavery to me. Right?
Just saying.
Right? So I'm just like, it looked, it quacked, it did all the things. It did all the things but call itself a duck, right?
Yeah.
And so I find that really, really super interesting. And the decision that got me, because I spent a lot of my time outside of my reading thinking about legal systems, right? And so the reason why the Silks lose, right, is primarily because they lied. Primarily, when you listen to each of the families saying what their reasons were for voting against the Silks and exposing them to consequences, it was because we could tell that they were lying. They did something wrong and they lied about it. They lied to us consistently. They are not credible. So if you match their credibility against Shuri's credibility, Shuri wins, right? There weren't, a couple of them said we're not humans. We we shouldn't be subject to the same racism, and only one of them says racism. We shouldn't be subject to the same racism as humans. Also, we don't want to bring those conflicts from the past in our history back here, right? We have evolved beyond wiping out of families and these feuds. It doesn't serve us. We don't want them anymore, right? But so very few of the judgments or the opinions of each of the families on the council were actually about Shuri as a Black vampire, genetically, created vampire. I thought that was interesting. And Kiki, when you were talking also about like her creation, she was created by women. She was created by a group of elder mothers, right?
Yeah.
And her human mother was Black. It wasn't clear to me that the Ina who created her were. I thought they were actually white.
No, they are white.
They're white.
The human mother was the one that they got the melanin from. However,
right. Yeah. So her preciousness, like when people kept on telling her, do you understand how special you are? Do you understand how useful you will be? How important you are for all of us? That was actually one of the creepiest parts of it.
Yeah. It was the useful. It wasn't just this. It wasn't the special. It was the useful.
Yes.
It was the useful. Like, again, tool, work, servant.
Yeah, this reproductive future. And it's interesting because, again, in reading that old futures book that I had, because it looked specifically at like older science fiction works that looked at futuristic societies from the perspective where so much, at least of the white cis hetero stuff, was very much wrapped up in reproductive futures. Like, how will we reproduce? What will that look like? Who will we allow to be in that future utopia, and who are the ones who need to die out? And of course, like when it came to the white, it was actually really interesting how consistently in white feminist science fiction to this day, like the newer ones are writing almost the exact same as the racist ones from like the late 19th to pre-20th century. The same preoccupations. I was so creeped out. Anyway, point being that, so what the point that she made was that with these reproductive technologies like surrogacy, these are always flowing from like the poor to the rich. Like it's from the ones who are weaker to the more dominant in society. And I found that complication really interesting in that vampiric society with Shuri, because it was on the one hand this hopeful future in the figure of a mixed race body, but also to be used for exploitative ends in a way, like without her having any power or say. Like folks were like already like arranging it for her, and that was rather interesting to consider.
Yeah, I also found it interesting when it comes to the idea of reproducing. Shuri is one person, one individual. Of all of the vampires who are still in existence, all of the families who are still in existence, they haven't stopped reproducing. There's all of you. There's one of Shuri. And even if the decision is made to reproduce Shuri, where you only got one Black person in this other outfit, where the fuck you gonna get all this fucking melanin from? Shuri was, again, GMO. They had to bring in technology to make Shuri as Black as she is, with the abilities that she has. So the whole idea, again, looking at Catherine, and Injeri does such a better job. Y'all know I suck at remembering people's fucking names. But the idea of the threat that characters like Catherine felt, knowing this heifer is 53, she's not even old enough to she bonded by accident with the human symbionts that she has because she needed to feed. But when placed in a situation where there is an option to bond, the decision was made not to do so. And that's another way that they tried to fuck her up in the trial, to say that she bonded with Daniel, and Daniel was like, nope. But in all of this that has happened, they're not able to think. And Shuri is smart enough to know this. Like, she's smart enough to know that it's just me. And she's smart enough to know that in wiping out my family and my not just my family, like my entire town, you just murdered everybody in the town. And then you murdered everybody in our friend family town. Did you think that all of the research was just there? Like the dumbness behind it for me is paramount, because all that you're doing has to do with the development. You're able to do this with the development of technology. And to think that just by wiping out two civilizations of Ina, however you pronounce it, that was going to fix a problem that you fucking thought you had, is dumb. Because again, you have one person, and of this one person, she is not Anyanwu. She cannot grow a penis and impregnate a woman. There is one way for her to fucking reproduce. So that's a whole tangent. That's a whole tangent.
Can I just, before, actually, does anyone else want to offer their thoughts? Josh, Linda, Sharon, Jennifer, Lauren, anyone who hasn't shared anything already?
Josh raised his hand.
Yeah. So this is my second time reading this book. I read it the first time 3 years ago, and this is probably the first time I reread an Octavia Butler book and thought less of it the second go around. Like, I'm not saying it's not compelling, but I just couldn't help but give it a slightly lower rating. I think it from 4.5 to 4 stars, because everyone's highlighted all the issues with it, but for me, I just felt like I expect a certain caliber of exploration and ideas, scientific and sort of philosophical approach from Octavia Butler, and I felt like it sort of was lacking in certain areas. Particularly, society has this assumption that consent, the ability to consent, comes with age, the ability of the mind to physically or mentally evolve comes with age, rather than physical evolution of the body. I mean, in most states, the ability to consent legally is nearly a decade before the brain is fully developed. And we come in here, we see that assumption around age is equivalent to the ability to consent, sort of brought over to our main character, where as soon as she is assumed to be 50, all of a sudden we can then assume that she is still capable of having the mental capacity of a 50-year-old. In every other way, she has the body of a child. We're supposed to believe, based off the assumption from the get-go, for the sake of the premise, that her brain is fully developed. And I felt like it was this sort of perpetuation, this idea we have as a society, this false idea we have as a society, that consent, the ability to consent and maturity comes with age, rather than the development of the human brain. And for me, I just was really disappointed to see how she approached that, how she wanted this premise, and she didn't. I think she didn't take it all the way. She didn't live up to my expectation of her as how she handles these type of things. In my opinion, that's my biggest thought taking away from my second read. I mean,
Question, Josh, because I like talking to Josh, so give us a minute. Is she fully mentally developed though? Because she's starting back at zero when we start this novel. Yeah. And again, I think what you are speaking on is also some of the issues that we had when we were reading it, because she's starting at zero. So is she fully mentally developed? Like, she's finding out. We have the start of one of the chapters that turns out I can read Ina. Like, yeah.
That's a great question. I don't know how to handle that. I mean, I think maybe, given that we're supposed to assume she still has the mental capacity of an adult, I imagine you would treat her the same way you would treat another adult who has amnesia. But you try not to, you would recognize the inherent imbalance that exists there with whoever she ends up attaching herself to, because she becomes dependent on them until she figures out who she is. But yeah.
Thank you.
I like, what you were saying, Nikita, about Black girls, the adultification, like the simultaneous adultification and infantilization of Black girls. I thought that what I appreciated about, I do appreciate the messiness of Fledgling too, that there's something sort of like etched about it as opposed to like smoothly drawn in and contoured and whatever, that, she like the very discomfort that she's, and to your point too, Akilah, about like, is the discomfort worth it? Like, do we get something out of it? Is there a payoff? For me, the payoff for what she presented us with is that like, she didn't look away and she put it on the table for us, right? And she put on the table for us something that is so taboo in the communities of, in Black communities, I think general, taboo, it's not spoken of enough. And she puts that in the book for us to contend with and wrestle with, and she doesn't resolve it for us, right? Like, it was, what I noticed this time reading it was that no one questioned Wright. Like, no one questioned Wright. No one questioned much, right? And the only trauma that was of Shori's that was acknowledged was the grief of the loss of her families and her communities. Like, but there was and Theodora. And it's sort of one of those things where you only really see how much empathy you can get when somebody actually demonstrates their highest level of empathy. Like, so until we get to the trial, we don't really hear people saying she has suffered a tremendous loss, right? Not really in the same way. Like, the first time that when she runs into Yosef was like, I can't imagine what you've gone through, but also stay here, don't leave because I'm afraid. Then his whole community gets wiped out. Then when she gets to the other people in California or whatever, they're like, we're really sorry that this happened to you. But it's only at the trial that we start hearing people actually say, like, this is what you've experienced, this is what you've gone through. But we don't see that when like, for example, when Wright makes that very profound comment that they could be wiping her out because she is Black, right? That this is white supremacy happening. We don't see a pause. There's no pause to recognize what that might actually mean for her. Nor is there any time spent on the fact that she's a child and she's with Wright. None of that. All they're concerned about is vampires and the murders and stopping those murders. And their main concern is that they don't continue and travel around to these other communities. It's not necessarily the grief that happened to her. And I like that theme of not necessarily recognizing like the grief and pain, like the dimensions of grief and pain that Black women, Black girls experience. That kind of rose to the surface this time I read it, as opposed to in past readings.
Yeah. Can I pose something potentially? Well, okay. So we've been thinking about power and consent in relation to Shori, because of the hybridity there with the 52-year-old with a 10-year-old body, etc. And I think I want to shift it to the adult humans, because like we've been asking, like, why didn't anyone question Wright? He's a grown man, etc. But for the Ina, it's pronounced. Like Shori is the more powerful and dominant figure in this relationship. It's not the humans. The first time Wright sees her and they get into the car, because I went to find back the page again, his thing is like, oh, clearly like you're harmed, you're bleeding, I'm going to take you to the hospital. And Shori is the one who says no, and he's not cooperating. There's a scuffle and she bites him. She's the one who takes control of that situation, because he is actually trying to do, I think, what typical persons would say is the right thing to do. There's a child on the road, she looks injured, it's the hospital or it's the police. I think for us readers, there are like probably so many concerns around that, and like Black folks in the justice system and the medical system. But I mean, for Shori, there's none of that. She just has this instinctual response, like she cannot be seen. And she bites him to control him. Going back
without knowing it.
Without knowing, right? This is just acting like on an instinctual level. And I'm gonna go back to, again, that opening statement you guys had about Butler and her writing, the writings and freedom. Because a thing that, for me, what was interesting in the book and what others brought up in terms of what they wrote is that the question here seems to be not so much about the question of whether freedom, like ultimate freedom, is actually the best scenario. Like actually, especially for the humans, might it not be better for them? Might it not be better for them to actually be under the sway of the vampires? And that's actually a better existence than being like a free human practicing free will out there. And so like folks are like, you right. And I'm like, but it's not right. Like Shori was the one who started to control Wright and get him not, like there's this strange line, because a lot of the time, like Shori goes, I want to give you a free choice. There's this question of when exactly do the humans become addicted to enough that it becomes sort of fundamentally harmful for both of the partners in this relationship. There's like, oh yeah, there's this point where I could still leave if I wanted to. And Shori's like, yeah, you could leave if you wanted to. And I'm reading and I'm like, he can't leave if he wants to. Like, it's ambiguous. Like the line is not really drawn clearly as to how long it takes for the bite to work. But if one bite can already make you susceptible, it's just interesting to me how it all seems to be placed on Wright, not exonerating Wright, but to me, his actions were to take her, regardless of thoughts or what have you, was to take her to the hospital and the police. And she is the one who changed the dynamics of the relationship. And in fact, it's kind of weird how that whole thing is written too, because there are a lot of lines that Wright says, and I'm like, Jesus, this is gross. Why did Butler like lean so hard into this? Like, okay, if this is because we know the vampire myth, we know the whole glamour and the sexuality of it all. I was like, okay, but she really leaned into it. Like she really wrote it. And it's just, I just want to complicate that because I think the book complicates it. Like, who is actually the one with the power and responsibility about choice? Because again, what seems to be intriguing here is that here is someone who would typically be vulnerable. This is someone who would typically be the weaker party. This is the one who would be targeted. But ultimately, she is the one with the control and the power because she's the Ina and she has all of the powers of the Ina. And we actually see, in terms of the vampire society, the female Ina clearly seemed to be like rather dominant and more powerful and run things. And even without her memory, when she was dealing with the other vampires, they were like, whoa, okay, we get you. You're angry. We're going to settle down. You know, like she was able to do that at every step of the way. And it's interesting about, I think, how we read Wright according to our human society norms in terms of how we know it to operate here, versus what Butler poses. Again, I wonder, I still question to what purpose. Like, I kind of get it, like I kind of don't, but I just want to throw that out there. I'm seeing stuff in the chat and I'll read it now.
Yeah, there's also a difference, because I've been in the chat talking too. There's also a difference in how Shori approaches and deals with Wright versus Theodora. Shori bites Theodora, has an encounter of some sort of sexual nature that we don't get any details of with Theodora, and then leaves Theodora for about a week. And when she comes back, Theodora has never, because that was one of the things that I was going to say too, and I think I said it in the chat, that Wright is the only one who saw her pre-bite. Theodora, she bit her from the back. The other dude, I am spacing on his inclusion. I'm going to have to go back to reread that, because it's like, I know he's there, but I don't remember how he got included. Did they pick him up from another family when they all got together? I don't remember. I'm gonna have to look that up. Anyway,
his father, isn't he the one where his father was abdicating for him, and his father was like, "Oh, my son really wants to be with you. He really liked you since the moment he saw you." Is that
that's
him?
Victor.
I don't remember his.
No, what happened was before Shori's community, before Shori's community got burnt down, she was brought to
the
community because they were trying to find a community that was
family to mate her with.
Basically. Yeah, her and her sisters. And remember, after she became an orphan, but it's unclear that her sisters were Black. I think it was because she's Black. They wouldn't take her on her own. But when she went there the first time, he saw her. And then community breaks down. She comes back again, can't remember anyone, but he remembers her. And that was the first time that he was talking about, right?
Yeah. But yeah, so there are, of the people that she meets prior to, even the person that she attacks when they are at the second space, and she smells the gas being poured. He doesn't see her from the front. He sees her from the back. The guy that she stops when he shoots her, he sees her, but he's not noticing what the hell she is. She's just in his face and bam, you bit. So I think that she, without knowing, because the bite that she gives to Wright, she's acting on instinct. She's not acting like, I'm going to bite you and then we're going to be bonded and you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. I think it's fine. It's her understanding or coming to learn in some way, shape, or form what she is, and that she is different, that she decides not to make the same decision, mistake, interaction with her other symbionts as she did with Wright. Because even the ones that she picked up who were out of town from the second village that was burned, she gave them a choice. She said, I you can be part of my, I was about to say harem. That's not the word I want to use, but you can be part of my crew, or when we go to the next
family.
Thanks. Why would family equal? Anyway, you can be part of my crew, and we could take you to where we're going, and you can find yourself someone there, because it's going to be difficult for you because you've been fully bonded and you've been in this relationship with these Aina for so long. So I agree, Kiki, with you stating that she is the one who is in control, and we see that a lot throughout the duration of the story. And it's difficult to acknowledge / accept that when we are looking at this book through our experiences and what is acceptable in society and what some persons would like to make acceptable in society to handle and deal with and express their own fetishes. So that's a whole fucking thing in this in this situation. And of course, that's not something that Butler could have foreseen. Who the fuck would have foreseen that happening, 15 years down the road. And I also think in a lot of what we are discussing and our unsettledness with this, our discomfort with this, I kind of like it, because when we get to the end of this novel, we can feel that it's not done. We like this Shori story was not complete. Not that we would have made peace with any of the things that made us uncomfortable in the first book, but it would have given us more to look back. It's like looking at Wild Seed and then reading Mind of My Mind and then getting to Survivor, and we were like, huh?
Yeah.
And then getting Playsark after that and be like, okay, we can make connections, and then getting to Pattern Master. Like, we don't have that. Even with all of the questions that those stories gave us, we were good with the end. We were good with the ending. This is so unfinished, so unfinished. And again, I think that's also why our questions are valid and need to be expressed. And this is also why I'm like, don't start here, because there are folks who start here and be like, she ain't the author for me. That may be true, but read this book first.
So we're going to, where I'm just mindful of time. I love this discussion. Just to have like a mind blow moment. One of the beauties of reading together as a community for 2 years, and reading her work slowly, is that you can see, as Tati just showed us, we can make connections between our current read and past reads. And I'm not sure what you thought about, whether you saw this too, but I found myself thinking a lot about Kindred when I was reading Fledgling. First of the standalones that we've read, that she wrote, and then the last. And I think it's arguable that there was probably an enough community near or around the Rufus's family at that time. So Rufus is the boy that Dana meets the first time when she goes back. And I think when I was reading Preston talking about the different families and where they were from, I could have sworn that one of the families hailed from one of the communities that was near to Dana's foremothers' home, near that plantation. And I was like,
do this? Why do you do this? Why?
So I was just like, that I could be wrong, but I remember thinking it, and I didn't go back to Kindred, but I was like, they're all connected in some way, right? Like, all of her stories are connected in some fashion, but how interesting, how very interesting. Okay, anyway, yes, the Octavia E. Butler expanded universe. It's just somebody needs to map it out. Okay. So before I asked Tommy to bring back our slides, this has been a really great conversation. I know that if you're anything like me, you want to be talking about Fledgling a little bit more in some context. We'll have the ability to do some of that through the sound circle. So if you could share the screen again. All right, so we have passed that and the conversation with Kiki. All right, so what we're going to do right now is take our selfie. So if you can remove the screen, if you can get your books up. What bookmarks are those, Kiki? Is that somebody's face? That's so cool.
They're tabs.
Or are they tabs on the side?
Tabs. Yeah, they're tabs. So I'm going to be real honest. This was a very intriguing, but also kind of a hate read for me. So I used my Wuthering Heights tabs that I got in a book box because I hate Wuthering Heights, and I had like no idea like what book am I gonna
I love
like,
that for you.
read Fledgling, and Wright came on the page, and I was like, fuck this, here we go, Wuthering Heights.
Love it. Okay, so hold your books up if you're willing and turn off your screens if you don't want to.
I want MJ's and Olivia's cover.
I know,
Yes,
they're
they
great.
have the newer 7 Stories press with
Oh my God.
Oh, I love
Amazing
this.
American artist. I'm forgetting his name right now. Is it
Paul Lewin.
Thank you very much.
Okay, ready? We're gonna do the picture. 1, 2, 3. And then one more time. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm gonna do the picture one more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thanks everyone. And tell me if you can bring the screen back, and Tati will take us through our next step.
Okay. 3 to 5 sentences.
All right, so we have come to the time of our sound circle. What we ask that you do is choose a 3 to 5 sentence excerpt from the book that you enjoyed or that pissed you off, whatever, like go for it. Listen as others read, wait for a moment of silence, and then read your excerpt. There's no, this is on page, whatever, chapter, whatever. No, you go, just jump in and start reading and then listen. And if you want to do more than one, you can do more than one, but that's pretty much how it'll go.
Perfect, thank you. So we can remove the screen now. And the sound circle is now open.
Shori, the man asked. I liked his voice at once, and he smelled safe somehow. I mean, his scent made me feel safe, although I couldn't say why. Then I realized that he was looking at me, had spoken to me, and what he had meant by that one word.
And I stand.
Good.
And I stand with her because I've watched her. She is impaired. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose the memory of nearly all the years of one's life. Her memory was stolen from her, but her ability to reason wasn't stolen. The questions she's asked, questions that were answered again and again with lies and misdirection, were good and sensible questions.
What does a father think about his son coming to you? He wanted his son to come to me. He asked Preston to introduce us. So he's pimping his own son? I hesitated. I don't know what that means, but your voice says it's something disgusting. Joel's father hasn't done anything disgusting, right? He and Joel both looked at me and decided I would be good for Joel.
Preston wants you. He thinks you're worth the risk. He says your mother's made genetic alterations directly to the germ line so that you'll be able to pass on your strengths to your children. At least some of them will be able to be awake and alert during the day, able to walk in sunlight. Preston says you have the scent of a female who will have no trouble producing children. His sense of smell is legendary among the Ina. I believe him.
You're trying to get yourself an education, Joel said. I nodded. I have to re-educate myself. Right now, you probably know more about Ina history and about being Ina than I do. I have to learn. Problem is, I don't know what my re-education will cost.
William asked me to stay, but that made me run faster. The whole thing was too weird for me. Worse, I thought it sounded more like slavery than symbiosis. It scared the hell out of me. I stayed away for about 10 months. I'd only been bitten 3 times in all, so I wasn't physically addicted. No pain, no sickness, but psychologically, well, I couldn't forget it.
He was only looking at me and screaming. Then I began to recognize words. Murdering black mongrel bitch? And what will she give us all? Fur? Tails? He didn't shed tears. I wondered suddenly whether we could cry the way humans did. Russell just lay curled on his side, moaning and choking.
Wright told me what he remembered about vampires, that they're immortal unless someone stabs them in the heart with a wooden stake. And yet, even without being stabbed, they're dead or undead, whatever that means. They drink blood, they have no reflection in mirrors, they can become bats or wolves. They turn other people into vampires either by drinking their blood or by making the convert drink the vampire's blood. This last detail seemed to depend on which story you were reading. They were fictional beings, folklore. There were no vampires. So what was I?
Were all Aina originally based in Romania, Transylvania? No, they've been scattered all over Europe and the Middle East for millennia, or so their records say. They claim to have written records that go back more than 10,000 years. Joseph told me about them. I think he believed what he was saying, but I never quite believed him. 10,000 years?
Stefan looked at Yosef and Yosef shook his head. I don't believe so. Shori, our people have been trying to do this for generations. If you could remember, you'd know what a celebrity you are. People traveled from South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa to see you and to understand what our mothers had done.
I was all scarred. A few nights ago, 3 nights before this one, I was scarred. I remember thinking that I must have been burned all over. And I couldn't see for a while when I first woke up, so maybe my eyes were scarred too. I sighed. That's why I hurt so much and why I was so hungry and so tired. All I've done is eat and sleep. My body had so much healing to do. Scars don't vanish just because wounds heal, he said.
Peter Marcoux, Preston said. I stand with Shori, Peter Marcoux said. I don't want to. My family has been friends with the Silks for 4 generations. There was even a time when we would get along well with the Dolmans. But Shori has been telling the truth all along, and the others have been lying. Whatever their reasons are for what they've done, they did it. They did do it. And for the sake of the rest of our people and our symbionts, we cannot allow this to go unpunished.
I found myself on my knees beside Theodora, making sounds I could not recall ever having made before. She had come to me because she trusted me, loved me. She had been so happy when I asked her to join me here at Punta Nublada, where she should have been safe. I had promised her a good life, had every intention of keeping my promise. I would have kept her with me for the rest of her life. How could she be dead?
He started to leave, then turned back, frowning. Ordinary sun exposure burns your skin, even though you're black? I stopped. I had been about to protest that I was brown, not black, but before I could speak, I understood what he meant. Then his question triggered another memory. I looked at him. I think I'm an experiment, I think. I think I can withstand the sun better than others of my kind. I burn, but I don't burn as fast as they do. It's like an allergy we all have to the sun. I don't know who the experimenters are, though, the ones who made me black.
What is to be done with the Matthews child? He demanded. Nothing at all, Preston said. She should be adopted. She's a child. She's ill. She should be looked after, brought into a family that can teach her how to at least pretend to be Ina. You created Shori's problems, Preston said, but solving them is not your concern. Your only concern now is whether you accept your sentence or reject it. Now, for the last time, do you accept your sentence?
I suspect this kind of thing needs to be said more to my sons than to you, but you should hear it, at least once. Treat your people well, Shori. Let them see that you trust them, and let them solve their own problems, make their own decisions. Do that, and they will willingly commit their lives to you. Bully them, control them out of fear or malice, or just for your own convenience, and after a while, you'll have to spend all your time thinking for them, controlling them, and stifling their resentment.
And that's the sound circle. Thank you, everyone. We can have the slides back. So
Is this me or you?
you go ahead.
Okay. Our next book is our last book, y'all. We are coming to the end. Our next book, Unexpected Stories, is by any measure an unexpected gift. This, and I need to move Injeri's face, this slender but resonant volume contains 2 stories recently unearthed and never before in print. One of the most significant figures in modern science fiction, by one of the most significant figures in modern science fiction, Octavia E. Butler. A Necessary Being takes us into the heart of an alien culture with a rigid hierarchical system based on caste and skin coloration. With the arrival of visitors from a distant mountain tribe, the society known as the Rokun finds itself faced with the sudden prospect of profound social change. In the second story, Child Finder, the title character is a woman who uses her psychic abilities to track down children with similar nascent abilities and protect them from the abuses of a predatory society. These may be early stories, but they are clear reflections of a powerful and original talent, and their belated publication is a major literary event. As novelist Nisi Shaw notes in her eloquent introduction, we may live in a fundamentally unfair world, but sweet surprises occasionally come our way. Unexpected Stories is one of those surprises. It is a book that Butler's many admirers have been waiting for, whether they knew it or not. And our last live book chat for the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read will be Sunday, January 29th, 2023.
Yes, thank you. So please remember to mark your calendars for January 29th. You already have the ability to find us on Eventbrite and get your tickets. The tickets are free, and there are other ways to contribute to the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read by purchasing tickets for various levels of prices. So Tati and I have been doing this for over 2 years now, every other month, reading and connecting with you and creating the space so that we can do this. So we would appreciate any support you want to provide to us in doing that. And if we go to the next slide. So there will not be any pre-scheduled reading sprints for Unexpected Stories, and there weren't any for Fledgling. So if you want to receive any updates about the Octavia Butler Slow Read, please make sure that you get your tickets on Eventbrite and you'll watch your emails for updates. You can also subscribe to Onyx Pages to get updates as well. So if I do decide to do any content related to the slow read, you can find it there. And if you decide that you would like to create an opportunity for people to read Unexpected Stories with you, please let us know, and then we can share that with the community so that they can join you if that's an option.
And Injeri just touched on this, but these are the ways that you can keep in touch with us beyond the the live discussion. You can register on Eventbrite for the next live show. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Octavia E. Butler Slow Read. And the playlist of our previous lives are available on Injeri's channel, Onyx Pages on YouTube.
So one of the things that we've been asking for many of the shows is, how would you like for us to end our 2-year journey together? So for those of you who are watching the replay on YouTube, please feel free to share this in the comments below the video. For those of you who are here now, you will or who have registered, you'll receive an email with the feedback survey. What would you like to see our ending to be? We have gotten some feedback, which is great. And if there's anything that you want to add that you haven't had an opportunity to add yet, please let us know. It's likely that so far, it seems like we're not going to be doing another live show after January. So whatever it is we do will happen at the January show. So that seems to be where we're headed. But if you have any ideas, or if you would like to make a contribution, especially for those who have been with us since the day one, since Kindred, please let us know. And we may build in some opportunities during the actual live show to share your views on how this journey has been. And we did hear you that you were interested in some kind of memento to mark your journey with us. It's likely going to be something digital. So that is something that Tati and I will have a chat about. But we are going to be ending. And if you notice that Tati and I have big smiles on our faces, this has, it's definitely bittersweet. This has definitely been a labor of love. It has taken a lot of hours and out of our lives, and it has connected us to an amazing international community of lovers of Octavia E. Butler Slow Read. And so what we've done cannot ever be minimized. It's fantastic. It does need to end, and it will give us an opportunity to kind of reflect on what we've been able to accomplish and to connect in other ways after that. So yes, it's going to be a special event in January, and it is going to be our last one. So we hope you'll be able to make it live, and please share this, share the invitation with others. The Unexpected Stories, it will be new for most people. It's certainly new for me. I haven't read them. And it's a great opportunity for people who haven't been involved in the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read to join us for the very first time, even though it'll be the last time. Sorry? Olivia. Did you want to say something, Olivia?
Yeah, I really don't want to make this all about me because this is your guys's event. But my father he's an illustrator, and he once made a piece of one of his favorite authors where it was like the author's picture in the middle and then characters all around him. And I've been picking away at, I don't know if you guys can see this very clearly, but picking away at like little vignettes of Octavia's characters. And so that's my little personal project memento for this journey, because I probably would not have read all of Octavia's works if I had not stumbled across you guys.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I love that. And
That's
can, when
wonderful.
when you are ready to share that, can you please tag us in it, tag the slow read so that we can see what you come up with at the end? I would love to see
Definitely.
that.
Definitely. And I definitely want to hear feedback on what characters should I include? What kind of vignettes should they be in? Because I don't want it to all just be me and my interpretation of things.
So feel free to get in touch with us through the Eventbrite, so you can, contact the organizers, and we'd be happy to send an email to folks with your contact information so that they can contact you to give you their feedback on what scenes they think that you could include that were meaningful to them. So thanks for sharing that.
Oh, is that me?
It's okay. No rush.
If you are not yet ready to go, we will have a brief moment after the stream ends on YouTube where you can stay and talk and chat about Fledgling off the internet. Well, off YouTube. This is the internet. So yeah, if you would like to do that, just stay here.
All right, everyone. So with that, we'll stop sharing the screen, and thank you very much for joining us for the second last Octavia E. Butler slow read. It continues to be an amazing journey. Thank you in particular to Akilah, Wright, Kiki, for joining us and sharing your thoughts from your perspective and helping start off our conversation today. And thank you also, Tomi, for assisting with our slideshow. And so we are going to end the live stream now. Take care to everybody on YouTube who watched this live, and to those who are going to be watching this in the replay. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon, or whatever time it is for you.